Welcome into It's Just Wrestling, your favorite, 10th favorite, 40th favorite pro wrestling podcast. I'm Russ Joy, and I woke up this morning and I had an idea in my head. I was like, all right, we're going to do a show. Going to finally get back to doing this show in a regular way, and I thought, you know what? There's a lot going on. AEW talked about bringing back the ranking system. I was like, all right, maybe we'll talk about that. Then I watched Raw, and I saw Cody Rhodes and CM Punk standing nose to nose in a WWE ring. And I thought to myself, man, if only there had been a company that could have given that to us sooner. And then I thought, all right, well, I'm going to do the show. And as I'm like getting through the normal part of my morning, as I'm getting ready for the regular 9-to-5 job, I see this massive breaking news from the WWE, from TKO Group. It started with TKO announcing that Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is now on the TKO Board of Directors. As part of that deal, The Rock gained full ownership of the trademark, The Rock, which he then licensed back to the WWE for, I believe, 10 years for the use of pro wrestling. So, okay, that happened. That was cool. That was nifty. And I want to know, as we go through this, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching on Twitter, if you're watching on Instagram Live or Facebook, drop in the comments what you think. But obviously, the big breaking news that came out of this morning is that it's not The Rock, although that is news. The news is that, shockingly, the WWE has opted to send nothing but their biggest show, Monday Night Raw, or at least the one that had the most history, 30 years on linear TV. They are breaking that bond with the consumer, and they are going fully streaming. Now, this is not necessarily the biggest shock that they looked to go to streaming. There had been plenty of rumors out there that WWE could have looked to move to an Amazon Prime, where, in fairness, it probably would have been the best fit. From a marketing perspective, going to Amazon and being able, Punk comes out to the ring in a new shirt, to have a little pop-up that pops up wherever you're watching on Prime, and to have the ability to then immediately add that shirt to your cart. Would that have been, for the corporate speak, would that have been the most synergistic way to do this? Sure. But the move to streaming is massive. The move to Netflix is massive. This is something that could fundamentally change the way that people watch pro wrestling, because there have been those rumors for quite some time that AEW might eventually move to HBO Max to Max. Obviously, the WWE has the deal in place with Peacock, which runs out in 2026, putting this whole thing into quite the conundrum. Peacock, owned by NBC Universal, which also owns USA Network. There are plenty of questions out there right now that have not been answered yet about, all right, the Peacock deal that has all of the streaming for Raw, for SmackDown, for PLEs, for specials, that runs out in 2026. Are we in a situation where in 2026, this bidding for what replaced the WWE Network now goes between Peacock and Netflix? Like, who ultimately is going to get all of the streaming rights? One part of the Netflix deal that is interesting is that while they won't have access to streaming SmackDown or NXT or the premium live events in the US domestically, Netflix does gain the right to stream all of those shows, all of those events anywhere outside of the US. So if you're watching in Canada and you have a Netflix subscription, starting in 2025, you're going to have the ability to watch all of the shows through Netflix, which is pretty wild. Now, I have some questions about it. I would love to know from people in the comments section what this is going to look like. But there, I think, are going to be ripples felt throughout the industry. And I go to this first from Clinton Davis saying, finding stuff on Netflix is going to be a nightmare. I mean, one thing that I think is pretty clear is that when the WWE moved to Peacock, it became harder to find things. You started seeing like season 38, season 39. It wasn't quite as intuitive as the WWE Network was. My bigger issue, as I look at this from like the Netflix perspective, is okay, now you're going to have to spend more money. The general regular consumer, many of whom are not fans of streaming or are not fans of premium packages, are now going to have to get a Netflix subscription. I saw Andrew Zarian, who's always on top of this stuff with Matt Men podcast. He put out a thing, could this potentially lead to Netflix offering multiple tiers? Could they have multiple tiers of Netflix to include live events? Could it be that the $15 or whatever you're spending monthly to have access to Netflix isn't going to be enough by 2025 to watch Raw? Maybe you have to pay another $5 or $6 a month just to get access to live sports. In this case, WWE Monday Night Raw. That will not go well for a large segment of the pro wrestling fandom, especially if all you're getting is Monday Night Raw. Now, don't get me wrong. If it comes out that the deal with Peacock to essentially house all the WWE content to replace WWE Network, if that's going to move to Netflix in 2026, and there's a very clear line that people can understand from the get-go, well, then that's different. I mean, Netflix is going to do more content than just Raw. They're going to have documentary series. There are going to be other things that they're going to try to provide value to people who are going to subscribe to the service. But it is a concern, especially if you're somebody who doesn't like the notion of having to buy streaming services. Now, again, every year you get more and more people who understand cord cutting and more people who understand the value of subscribing to a Peacock or subscribing to a Netflix or subscribing to an Amazon Prime. But there is a large segment of the fan base that is not going to move. So you're inherently, as WWE, as TKO, you have to understand that you're likely going to hemorrhage some viewers. You hope that it's not going to be a substantial amount. However, the report that came out from CNBC is that this deal with Netflix is going to net the WWE $500 million a year for 10 years. $500 million a year for 10 years. That's insane. That's an insane amount of money for any property, let alone pro wrestling. Now, you could make the case, and I certainly would, that by virtue of SmackDown moving to Fox, it became the A show. It became the number one show. And that's fine. But I do think it is a concern if that is the perception, and perception matters. If SmackDown is the number one show, it is the A show, then telling people that you've got to go off and add a premium package through Netflix, it might not go well. And so I'm going to throw an idea out there, and I would love to know from the people on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram Live, and on Twitter. If this happens, which it will, it's going to create a void on linear TV. And I get that cord cutters are a thing. I'm a cord cutter. I have YouTube TV. So I technically have cable without cable, right? But if on linear TV there is a void left, if people have gotten used to for 30 years on Monday nights tuning into USA Network or whatever channel and watching Monday Night Raw, and they are not a fan of having to sign up and pay additional money every month for Netflix, is this the perfect void for AEW to fill? Did they just serve this up? They got $500 million a year. I don't fault TKO or the WWE for doing it. By all means, it's great business. But if you're AEW, you've now been gifted Monday nights on linear TV. How do you not have a conversation with Warner Brothers Discovery, who presumably will now re-up with AEW? How do you not have the conversation about moving Collision or Dynamite to Mondays? You're going to pick up people. You're going to have to. Because not every consumer, not every fan who watched WWE Raw on linear TV is going to pay to watch it on Netflix. And if that's the case, and there's a void, and people are creatures of habit, that's the smartest thing to do. It's the best business AEW can do, is try to fill that void. Now I want to go here to Ethan on a forklift over on YouTube. What effect does this have on their documentary production? I don't know. I mean, you would think that on one level, you're probably going to see more and more specials, right? You would have to assume that you're going to see more high-quality specials. I mean, you look at the popularity of the show, the wrestlers that covered OVW. It was huge. It had a great audience. It picked up a ton of buzz on social. What you ended up seeing was it had an impact on OVW's business. They had additional investors come in after the show aired. And then you've also seen that it's going to likely get re-upped for another season or two. You saw Mickie James now moved over there to work with talent. So that had a direct impact on OVW's business. One has to assume that the number of documentaries, which includes, I believe, the Vince McMahon documentary that's been talked about ad nauseum, that's going to come out. That's certainly going to cause a lot of interest. It's going to garner a lot of interest among the wrestling community and non-wrestling community alike. I'll go back to Ethan here on YouTube. Another big question, where does this leave TNA with rumors of Anthem giving them permission to shop the TV rights? It is a great question. It's a great point. And again, like if it's me, I'm certainly looking, if I'm a wrestling company and I'm looking to build my viewership, I understand that there is a massive issue with Monday Night Football. I get it. That's 17 weeks out of the year. And then sometimes 18 if they have a wild card round like happened this year. So you're looking at 17, maybe 18 weeks out of a 52-week year where there is NFL football. That's it. I think sometimes that gets overrated. I think it gets overblown. I get that it happens during a very important period of the calendar and that during the summer, numbers typically tend to go down, and that also happens to be when there's no NFL football on Monday. But I do think that if you're TNA, you have to now consider, do we go back? I mean, TNA has gone into those waters before. Do they potentially look to go on to Monday nights to try to pick up that linear TV audience? I don't know if I would do it, especially considering where they've been at with Access TV and with their lack of public and national exposure. I think it's been very hard to find the TNA product, even though it's been a very good product, especially of late. I just don't see how you go from what is viewed as not much exposure to then saying, we're going to try to fill that Monday night void. I don't see it. I could be wrong. Ethan also points out they average about 100,000 viewers a week. If they could double it, it's impressive. It would be. But are you going to do it on a Monday night? Like, I'm not so sure. Again, I think AEW is the better play here to try to capture that habitual pro wrestling audience that's looking for it on TV. But I could be wrong. I think it's more likely what you see is, like, could a TNA look to land with, it likely wouldn't be a Universal property, so it wouldn't be an NBC. Could you look and see potentially, now that Disney had perhaps had interest through FX, could TNA look to land on FX? That'd be pretty great. Somebody clip this, because that to me, if I were trying to market the rights to TNA, I would be looking at every rumored company that had interest in AEW rights or had interest in WWE rights. And assuming that Disney was involved and that Disney was interested in marketing and potentially moving a pro wrestling show to FX, that's where I'd go if I were TNA. And I think it makes a ton of sense. You could then perhaps pick up some streaming. I know that they have their TNA Plus subscription service, but like you could very well look at, hey, now we're going to add it to Hulu, that like all of the TNA pay-per-views, premium live events as they're now calling them, are going to be on Hulu. Like that to me is interesting. I think that makes all the sense in the world. I don't see them landing on like an ESPN Plus, because I still think that in the grand scheme of things, ESPN as an entity wants to keep sports entertainment and sports separate, right? Now, if it's a TKO combined package, if you were to ever see a moment where TKO, where Endeavor decides we're going to buy TNA, well, then it's certainly interesting, right? Like there were those rumors out there about like, could we see a scenario where the WWE, where their parent company Endeavor goes out and buys TNA? Like, could you then see an FX with a streaming deal that happens where you see like some synergy, a little bit of crossover with ESPN Plus? Like maybe it's possible, but I don't see that yet. So there's that part of this. I do want to get back to how the biggest news here is WWE moving Raw off of linear TV. First time in 30 plus years that it will not be available on regular TV. And I 100% understand why there are going to be people who are going to be upset. Because again, you have to look at it as a value add. If your idea was, hey, I'm a cord cutter, why do I want to have Peacock? Well, one, you're getting all the premium live events. And two, you're getting all of the back archive stuff, and you're getting some of their additional documentary series. So if you're a huge pro wrestling fan, or if you're a huge WWE fan, you have to absolutely think like, all right, there's a ton of value here. I can go back and watch old episodes of Nitro. I can go back and watch old episodes of Thunder. I can go back and watch, a bunch of their archive footage. I can go back and watch any Hell in a Cell I want. I can go back. There's a ton of value there. But with the Netflix side of thing, the way that they're going to have to market this thing, the way they're going to have to build to this to get people on board is they're going to have to ramp up the documentary side of things. I don't see them ever moving to doing like a Dark Side of the Ring sort of show, but do I see them doing more shows that are based on legends or more shows that are based on like time periods in history? I could see that. And then you're trying to sell that along with Raw to try to get people to watch. But again, $500 million. It's an insane deal. It's value that just wasn't out there from anyone else. There were the rumors for a while that Warner Brothers Discovery might have been interested, that they may have been interested in going out and getting the rights to SmackDown, that they may have been interested in going out and trying to get the rights to Raw. Obviously, there were plenty of troll accounts on Twitter that were hoping that Warner Brothers Discovery would end up with the rights to Raw just to stick it to AEW and see how that goes. I have to say, like, in the grand scheme of things, if you're a pro wrestling fan and you want the industry to be healthy, then like that shouldn't have been the way to go. I do think that like ultimately if AEW now re-ups with Warner Brothers Discovery, you now have WWE spread across the CW for NXT. They've got USA Network for SmackDown, and now they'll have Netflix for Raw. They have full market share. Like they're all over the place. They have great visibility everywhere. You're on broadcast TV over the air with CW. You're on cable with USA Network with SmackDown, and now you've got your foothold in streaming. And like, there's another part to this that I guess is probably worth diving into. It's a paradigm shift in a sense, because you're taking this well-known, long-held entity of Raw and you're moving it to streaming. And it can be a precursor to what is going to happen. Might not happen in the next 2 years. It might be 5, might be 10. But what you could end up seeing is a lot of pro wrestling shows moving off of linear TV and onto streaming services. Again, if AEW re-ups with Warner Brothers Discovery, it's almost impossible to envision a scenario where they aren't live streaming, simulcasting Dynamite, Collision, Rampage, pay-per-views on Max, right? And it stands to reason that at some point between Peacock or Netflix, like probably it would be interesting, now that SmackDown is going to be moving to USA Network. Like, are we going to see a scenario where Peacock starts live streaming SmackDown? Like if you're worried about a younger demographic cutting the cord and not having access to USA Network, do you make the business decision that we're going to start simulcasting this on Peacock as well? It's possible. So like you're not that far away from potentially having SmackDown and Raw down the line available as a simulcast. It's interesting. It's a very interesting scenario that we find ourselves in. It's happening in sports. The NHL partnered with ESPN and as well as, Warner Brothers Discovery, but like they have the deal in place with ESPN Plus where they got rid of center ice. So the NHL has virtually all out of market games available to hockey fans through ESPN Plus. Major League Soccer decided that instead of worrying about coming up with a million TV deals with, small market or with broadcast, over the air channels, that they just moved all of their games to Apple TV Plus. And so if you're an MLS fan, yes, there are times where like you'll get an ESPN game or Fox game or whatever. But for the most part, you have to go to subscribe to Apple TV Plus to watch Major League Soccer. A lot of the best English Premier League games have moved off of linear TV and are mostly available through Peacock. Serie A and La Liga went to ESPN Plus, or one of them I think is now on Paramount. But like the idea is out there, and especially with sports, they laid the groundwork for what could happen. There are already people talking about, hey, is the NFL going to move to a model down the line where you're going to have to pay to watch the Super Bowl? where like the Super Bowl is going to become its own kind of pay-per-view. I think that's where we're heading. The sports leagues typically dictate a lot of this. They lay that groundwork for what's going to happen. And if you're a pro wrestling fan and you're anti-streaming, the bad news for you is that it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Eventually, a lot of these things correct themselves, but I think it's really interesting. It's a huge change that we're seeing. So, all right, WWE Monday Night Raw. They didn't call it Monday, by the way. They just said Raw. They didn't say Monday. Could they look to move Raw off of Mondays on Netflix? Is it possible? Are they looking to try to like put it on a Tuesday so that they don't have to go up against the NFL 17 or 18 weeks? I'm not totally sure. So we'll have to see. Like, that's going to be interesting. Could they potentially move Raw off of Monday nights as part of this deal with Netflix? I wouldn't rule it out. It's entirely possible they could move it to another night. Again, if they do that, all right, let me kind of take this back as I'm all over the place today. And again, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, Twixter, X, if you're on Instagram Live, drop a comment below. Let me know what you think of this move of Raw to Netflix. If it's me, again, if for whatever reason Raw moves off of Monday night as part of this deal with Netflix, if you're another pro wrestling company and you don't try to jump at the opportunity to fill that void on linear TV, you're not doing business the right way. And you're fundamentally missing the boat. That would be a legitimate opportunity because, again, people are creatures of habit. So AEW to me makes the most sense. I think they need to get Collision off of Saturday night. And now you have a void. As of 2025, you will have a void on linear TV. You can try to make it work. The branding of Collision is largely reminiscent of Monday Nitro anyway. So why not give it a shot? It can't hurt. I mean, like, you're probably going to draw a bigger number on Monday nights on linear TV no matter what. And again, if they re-up and they, as part of a deal with Warner Brothers Discovery, they say, hey, we're going to also want to have Dynamite or Collision or Rampage also simulcast on Max, well, then it's kind of a no-brainer to do it. And the question before about TNA, like, could TNA look to do it? It's possible. I just don't see them doing it on Monday nights. So, okay, we've got that part out of the way. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, comes to a deal with TKO to gain the full custody, in a sense, full ownership of the trademark, The Rock, which he then took and licensed back to the company. Brilliant business move. So he's now on the board of directors. They touted all of the many different ventures that Dwayne Johnson has had since leaving pro wrestling. This certainly, the move to get on the board of directors, I can't imagine that his program with Roman Reigns is going to now be a couple of months. I have to think that this means that to some extent The Rock is going to be in the orbit, the general orbit of the WWE going forward. I can't envision a scenario where he goes back in on wrestling like he has, where he's kind of gotten all of the creative juices flowing again. He's back in front of live crowds. He's had some movies that have not gone the way that he may have wanted them to at the box office. He knows that there is a huge, huge group of people who will absolutely gobble up anything he puts in front of them. He's got that loyal pro wrestling audience in front of him. And now on the board of directors, stands to reason that, like, hey, this thing with Roman Reigns might not just be a Mania match. I still don't believe that it's going to be Elimination Chamber. I don't see that. But if we get The Rock and Roman at WrestleMania, if we get The Rock and Roman as a one-off, as its own event, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's the end of that story, especially with how involved I expect him to be. So that's big. Him getting the license back to using the trademark however he wants. Again, he's licensing The Rock as a trademark back to WWE for pro wrestling purposes, which I guess then means that he will be able to still use his newly reacquired trademark on merchandise and on things that aren't related specifically to pro wrestling. So that's also an interesting note on that. Now, there's one other thing I wanted to get to today. And I was kind of torn on whether or not to dive into it today because of the news of Raw to Netflix. But there's a huge thing that happened on Raw that I would be remiss if we didn't have at least a moment about, right? I will come back later this week with an episode to go over whatever happens on Dynamite, because I expect Dynamite to have a strong show. But on Monday night, we finally saw, in a meaningful way, Cody Rhodes, CM Punk in a ring, standing across from each other, 2 live mics. And they kind of let it fly a little bit. Now, if you were expecting Cody Rhodes and CM Punk to have a big powwow about what happened in AEW the first time on the mic, it was never going to happen. I'll admit that I sat there and I thought to myself, like, hey, this would actually be pretty cool. Like, could we maybe get a moment here where they do at least one tip of the cap, one little nod to their time shared in AEW? But then you go back and you think about the time that they actually did have together. I think it was a 5-month period or so that they were both at the company. They never really had a meaningful crossover. I don't even remember if they were ever in the ring together. I know that there was one live event I can remember where Punk jumped into Cody Rhodes' arms, but it was like after a show. It was like one of those, send the crowd home happy moments. But like these guys who were both under the AEW umbrella are now standing face-to-face in a WWE ring talking about what is to come at Royal Rumble, that they're going to go through each other if need be to get the main event of WrestleMania. And I thought it was a solid enough segment. I think they both got their stingers in. I love the almost Christian Cage moment of Punk saying, I want to talk about your dad. And the crowd got very uncomfortable, right? Like they were hyped. When both of these guys came out to the ring, they got a hero's welcome. When they stood in the ring, you were getting Cody chants and CM Punk chants. It was great. Boy, what a great money-making idea. Can you imagine having both of these guys in your company and then never putting them in the ring across from each other? That would be really bad business. I can't envision a scenario where anybody ever would have thought to themselves, I have these guys, let's keep them apart for a while. Anyway, they're in the ring across from each other, face to face, and they have a little bit of a standoff. And after he says, I want to talk about your dad, Punk talks about OVW and about how Dusty asked him to keep an eye on his son, Cody. Really nice story. And then Punk drops the line about how he wasn't raised by a dad who was famous or was in the business. He was raised by an electrician. And then he looks at Cody and he says, I guess that makes me more of the American dream than you. Crowd again. Ooh. And then Cody kind of recovers, gets his footing about him. And then he alludes to the pipe bomb and to some of the things that Punk said in the pipe bomb. And if you are a pro wrestling fan who pays attention to more than one company, you'll recall that the last promo Cody Rhodes ever cut in AEW with the ladders in the ring, challenging Sammy Guevara to the ladder match for the TNT title without a contract, he talked about the pipe bomb, and he talked about how all the things that CM Punk said are things that he ended up doing. And he said last night that while you talked that talk, I walked that walk. And so Cody says, well, I guess that makes me more CM Punk than you. And then that got the crowd going. And these guys line up across from each other. They go nose to nose. They did acknowledge that they're friends, which I think also is interesting because there was that notion that when Cody left AEW that it was because of CM Punk. And it's come back a bunch of times. There was a personal reason. They're never going to get into it. He's never going to talk about it. Tony Khan said he's never going to talk about it. But those guys acknowledged the friendship. Punk kept saying, Sunday morning, are we still going to be friends? Sunday morning, I'll go through you. Are we still going to have this friendship? There is so much money to be made with a Cody versus Punk program. And it doesn't have to happen right now. I mean, unless you are genuinely concerned that Punk is going to blow up again, which he has not done through a little bit of time here with WWE, and considering legacy is on the line and having the ability to go out on his own terms and do a whole bunch of things, I don't see a scenario where he's going to blow up. Could be wrong. It's happened before. But those guys, there's straight money to be made post-WrestleMania with Punk and Cody. I don't see them getting into a program leading up to Mania. The interesting thing, too, is like Seth Rollins admitting that he's going to do whatever it takes to keep the World Heavyweight Championship going into Mania. That's an interesting note. That's definitely something to keep an eye on. Gunther comes out and, has the face-to-face. I still expect Seth Rollins to have that belt and for him to defend that title at Mania. And it'll likely be against CM Punk. And maybe it'll be Punk has to win the Elimination Chamber to call his shot. I don't know how that's going to work yet. But it is interesting. Like, at some point, do we get the undisputed champion Cody Rhodes standing in the ring across from the world heavyweight champion CM Punk? And if you do, one of them has to turn. And Cody has never fully embraced the idea of being the one to turn. Like, could we go to a SummerSlam where you've got heel Punk as the world heavyweight champion and Cody Rhodes as the ultimate babyface as the undisputed champion? I don't know. But there are so many interesting things that you can do. You still have The Rock and Roman Reigns looming. Like, this is the big thing that's just kind of out in the periphery. Like, at what point do they interact? At what point do we get some kind of clarity, vision on what's going to happen? Is it going to be at Elimination Chamber in Perth, which, again, I still just cannot fathom that being the thing. I could see The Rock making an appearance at Elimination Chamber. As of right now, like, that would be a pretty cool thing to see. Will The Rock show up at the Royal Rumble? The way that you send all of this into chaos, by the way, is to have The Rock in the Royal Rumble. Like, imagine The Rock comes in at number 30, and Cody Rhodes is in the ring, and CM Punk is in the ring, and maybe Drew McIntyre is in the ring, and The Rock is there, and it's those four to end it. They all have their own claims. They all have their own reasons that they believe they should be a champion. However many minutes those guys are in the ring together, that is like can't miss TV. That's something to keep an eye on. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Thank you to all of you who joined live on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram Live. Would love to get your feedback. And like I said, I'll be back later this week to recap what happened on Dynamite. Because again, I think, I'll just say this here as getting ready to head out. AEW had a very up and down 2022. They had plenty of ups and very low lows in 2023. But at least at the start of 2024, I think they've kind of righted things. They've gotten things back on track. They've done a much better job of putting together compelling TV. They're bringing back the ranking system, which I have a lot of thoughts on. We'll get into that later this week. But then don't forget, you've got the Royal Rumble this weekend as well. So there's going to be a lot to talk about, and I'm going to make this show into something that's going to be a lot more regular. So I don't know yet. I thought about Tuesday to kind of recap what happens on Raw and the weekend with Collision and probably SmackDown, touch on that. Then do Thursday talking about Dynamite and previewing SmackDown. I'm not sure yet. We'll see. But the show is going to go back to, like, it's legitimately going to be a weekly thing. I'm now setting it in my schedule to make sure that this happens every week, at least once a week. But there are huge bits of news here. Again, Raw now moving to Netflix as of 2025. The deal with Peacock for streaming ends in 2026. A lot of intrigue there. They obviously have NXT going to CW. They've got SmackDown moving to USA Network. And by the way, didn't touch on this, but like this will come out at some point. The deal with Raw with Netflix doesn't start until the beginning of 2025. But the current deal for Raw on USA Network ends October 2024. So there's a 3-month period where, as of right now, they don't have a plan. They're still working out the logistics. My expectation is that you'll see Raw get extended with USA Network from October of 2024 until like through the end of the year, especially since they have that partnership now with SmackDown moving to USA Network. I think it's the easiest thing to do. It's a 3-month re-up. You just do an extension of current terms. So we'll see. But anyway, big thank you to everybody who tuned in. I'll be back again later this week to recap Dynamite, to look ahead to SmackDown, to look ahead to Collision, to look ahead to Royal Rumble. It's going to be a massive, massive week. And of course, we're still on the road to WrestleMania. And I just happen to be in the general WrestleMania area here outside of Philadelphia. So could be some cool stuff coming up as well. So big thank you. You can follow this show wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora. Google Podcasts is going away. I guess it's going to like YouTube Music, so you could go subscribe over there, I guess. Amazon Music if you have Amazon Prime. You can find this show on YouTube. You can find the show also, like some clips on TikTok, some stuff over on Twitter at It's Just Wrestling, No You and Just. But a big thank you to everybody who checked in today. Looking forward to talking to you more and more frequently and more often. So do me a favor, before you head out, whenever you watch this or listen to this, share the link to this episode. Share the podcast link, share the YouTube link, wherever you watch it, wherever you listen to it, share. Tell 2 people about it, and let's see if we can grow this thing. Like I said, it's either your favorite or your 10th favorite or 40th favorite pro wrestling podcast, but it's a lot of fun to do, and I do appreciate the people who checked in, especially on YouTube, and dropped in a nice comment. And look at this. Love this silly podcast from Rob Jones. Better luck next time over on Twitter. Thanks for covering. Thank you for watching. I'll be back later this week with a new episode of It's Just Wrestling, but for the meantime, WWE Raw moving to Netflix. Whew! A lot going on in the pro wrestling world. Thanks for tuning in. I will talk to you very, very soon.